student groups.
Jumping to the budget crisis, obviously there's been a lot of actions taken by students of varying degrees, again, to get increased state funding, to convince the university to cut some programs over others, and so on. And some of them have been pretty controversial in that they've kind of divided the student voice. Like the Wheeler Hall occupation is a good example where you had some students who took control of the campus building and kind of and shut it down so other students could not attend class. Like, I'm really curious what your personal sentiments were on the Wheeler occupation. Did you feel that it was a valid civil disobedience, or was it misguided, Senator Stern?
And I think it's always important that the ASUC supports the voices of the students. And I think some of these protests and demonstrations have been great in garnering attention to our cause and attention from the media especially that this is a significant issue. But I also think, Senator Kwon mentioned there's kind of a consensus around the movement, and I think you're right. I think a lot of students have been turned off by this occupation especially, and by a lot of the protests. And I think as president it's important that we find different avenues and different ways for students to engage in this issue.
So did you disapprove of the action that the protesters take?
I felt that what they were doing was, because it was excluding so many students from getting to class and pursuing their education, I think that was flawed, and I was disappointed to see them do that, because there were students that might have had midterms, there were students trying to get their education, trying to study, getting what they pay for. If we're paying for our classrooms, we need to be engaging in our education. I'm not saying that demonstrations overall are bad, but I think this one specifically turned a lot of students off. And if we're going to continue to lead this movement, we need to find ways that students who aren't comfortable necessarily protesting or walking out, find ways for them to engage. So if that's letter writing campaigns or lobbying visits or phone calls to their district offices, that's something we need to explore, but making sure that every single voice on this campus is being heard, not just the most vocal.
Senator Kwon?
This is a good question. I've actually gone back and forth about how I felt about the occupation. While I'm supportive of the intent behind it. I'm supportive of the movement to support public education, and I'm actually very supportive of protesting and occupying buildings and these very grassroots type of forms of protesting as a tool to make social change. I felt that it was poorly planned. There were students in there who didn't realize the building was being occupied until they were in there, and the cops were like, "Oh my goodness!" So I felt it was poorly planned. I felt. Yeah, like Senator Stern said, it did alienate students, and I think that's something that we always have to watch out for, because in order for us to get anywhere with this movement, like most students have to be with us. We have to be unified. We have to make sure that that we're not taking away from our goal with the actions that we choose to pursue this goal with, right?
Would you characterize yourself as against amnesty for them or for it, or how do you feel that the student conduct process in general has treated people involved in these type of actions this year?
I am for amnesty. I was for amnesty. I am for amnesty for these students. I think the students have the right to protest on their own university for the causes that they believe in, and I also feel that the way the situation was handled was appalling. I was really disappointed with the way that the Dean of Students office handled the situation, and the way that the student advocate office, who is supposed to be the student advocate for these students, couldn't even get in touch with him. They had to stand in line, and they actually had to negotiate with somebody else who had an appointment to give up their appointment so they could speak to the Dean of Students in this crucial moment. So I feel there's a lot of bureaucracy that inhibits or that deters the ASUC from being able to fully advocate for these students. And I think that we should have a clear path to administration when these things happen, so we can be the student advocates, because we're students, and I don't think that anybody but the students should be advocating for themselves.
Senator Stern, same question.
Yeah, I think I don't know if we can make a blanket statement as amnesty for all of these students. I think the real issue here is the Code of Student Conduct. The proceedings for these conduct hearings are very much behind closed doors. They aren't very transparent. A lot of these students don't even know what kind of violations they're facing. In terms of the ASUC, it's hard to explore what kind of history these students have, what the representation for these students will be in these hearings, and I think that's what really needs to be reformed. Now, if certain students have prior violations, and this is a history of of certain violations of the code of conduct. I don't know if we can say just blanket amnesty for all the students. However, I think that we need to understand that this is an educational institution, and these students were exercising their education and exploring ways of protest and civil disobedience. That I think we should make sure that if there are any penalties or punishments, they need to be reasonable. And we wouldn't want anything as extreme as expulsion, because these students are trying to learn the best way to advocate for themselves, and we need to keep them in our educational community to make sure that they can learn in their future the best way and the most appropriate way to voice their concerns and effectively protest in a way that doesn't hurt anyone else or potentially cause harm to the campus.
Were you asking amnesty from being arrested, right? Or
Yeah, well, amnesty from the student conduct process. I mean, there are
from
some.
the student conduct.
Yeah.
I mean, I think. Yeah, I mean that's a different question. I was thinking amnesty from being arrested, from being things like that. I think yeah.
So in terms of the student conduct process,
In terms of the student conduct process, I would have to agree with them with Senator Stern, and in that there is an issue of transparency there, where these people that are being evaluated. Well, first of all, we're actually updating the student conduct code right now, which is good. I think the Kelly Fabian, who's running for student advocate, is doing that right now, and I think that's something that's necessary, and I think that was something that was late. Like we should have done that before, and it wasn't until this year that we did it because of all these troubles that came about with the protests. So I feel like the student the code now that it's updated, I feel like the amnesty offered to students in terms of violating this code. I would have to say it's a case by case. I think there are some people in Wheeler who really believe in the cause, and who this was like their moment to really fight for something that they believe in. There are other people who are just there to cause trouble, who are there to stir things up. There are other people who didn't realize that they were occupying a building. So I think in terms of violating the student conduct code, I think it should be a case by case basis. I don't think any of them should be arrested.
Getting back to the election itself, there's a strong possibility this year that the executive positions will not be swept by any one party.
Mm-hmm.
What challenges and opportunities do you feel that will bring to the ASUC president next year? Starting off with Senator Stern.
So, I think the most important thing is that if the office of the president is responsible for maintaining the entire well-being of the entire association and student body, it's important that we have direct liaisons in between each of the offices. As president, I hope to work with our student organizations. That would fall more under the auspices of the EVP, but also on academic issues and also external affairs issues. Especially external affairs issues, I think, are going to be the highest priority this year in terms of lobbying Sacramento and getting involved in more funding from the state. And if I were president, I would definitely want to make sure that the structure within the ASUC is that there are liaisons between each office, so that if there isn't that communication between the different parties, however it might play out, that we have constant communication between these, so that we can coordinate our efforts. And especially if I'm elected and some of my other running mates aren't, which would be unfortunate in my opinion. But I would be happy to engage with them, despite being running against each other per se. If elected, we have to work together to represent the student body effectively, and I'd be more than happy to make sure that we're in constant communication so we can coordinate our efforts as best as possible.